Fight Club was released in 1999, directed by David Fincher, and stars Edward Norton and Brad Pitt. Widely considered to be one of the best films of the 90s, if not all time. It's a film that I have complicated feelings regarding it. It's a film that, by its very nature, opens itself up easily to discussion. Um, and it's a film that, when I watched it for the first time, I didn't really like it very much. And I'll get into my thoughts more in depth throughout the course of this review, but I didn't like it the first time I saw it. I've rewatched it a few times, most recently yesterday, and it's a film that has grown on me. I'm certain that it's a good film, but even after rewatching it and sort of looking a bit more in depth, reading some of the literature on it, it is a good film, but I'm not totally convinced it's a great film. And that's what I'm going to get into a bit more of today. So just a heads up, I will be discussing full spoilers with this film. If you've not seen the film, you don't want to know what happens, then I'd suggest not listening to this review. I think I'm going to approach this review in reverse. So normally I discuss the positives first and then get into negatives. With this film, I think it makes sense to sort of explore my issues with the film first, because it's not it's a bit of a curious one, really, because on paper this is a film that I should absolutely unremittingly love. I love films that are based around themes and ideas, films that don't necessarily follow conventional plot structures, that have sort of interesting, quirky characters. It's a film that I should love on paper, and I'm a really big fan of David Fincher and his films. But for some reason, this film doesn't quite. There's a disconnect there for me, and it's not total. And as I said, the film has definitely grown on me. I don't think it's a bad film in any way, shape, or form, but there is a slight disconnect there, and I had to think about it, and it's been interesting digging into the film a little bit deeper. Um, I think the biggest issue for me when I first watched the film a number of years ago, I think possibly even a decade ago, um, revolved around the plot and the plot twist. For me, and I felt this rewatching it as well, even though I do like the film a bit more now, I think the plot is quite messy. And by that, I mean it's not particularly with regards to the twist. Now, I know that this film can't be regarded just with regards to the plot, because there's a lot going on beneath the surface. But but with the plot, which is an important part of the film, I just felt that the twist at the end, that Edward Norton essentially has a split personality disorder, and Brad Pitt's character has been his alter ego throughout the film. Brad Pitt's character doesn't exist essentially. It is just a persona of his, and he goes between being Brad Pitt's character and Edward Norton's character. With regards to the plot, it didn't work for me, and it still doesn't really work for me. Although I understand it a bit more thematically now. I didn't think the twist was revealed in a particularly clever way. It's cleverly seeded throughout the film if you rewatch it. There's little clues here and there which are fine, but I think the plot as a whole doesn't really, in my view, doesn't really build up to it, and it doesn't really earn it. For instance, Edward Norton, it doesn't introduce the film. He's not set up as someone that has had a history of mental illness, for instance. I was reminded of the the film, probably not widely known throughout outside of the UK, but the film Filth with James McAvoy has a similar twist to Fight Club, which I won't spoil. But in that film, it's set up at the beginning that his character has mental health difficulties. He's gone through a lot of bad things, and the twist makes a little bit more sense. Whereas in Fight Club, in a plot sense, it feels quite left field. For instance, if he has this split personality disorder, where if you watch the film again, he's like having conversations with himself. Essentially, he's answering himself back in conversation. He flips between characters. And also he's like beating himself up in car parks and talking to imaginary people over the phone, things, talking to someone imaginary on a plane. I mean, it doesn't make sense in a plot sense because surely, if the plot of the film develops and he amasses this cult of people around him, starting with the Fight Club, going on with the Project Mayhem. I mean, people would not follow someone that was crazy like that. I mean, if you look at real life cult leaders, real life political leaders, even to get people to follow you, there's people need to be charismatic. They need to be composed, and I just don't really buy it with this film in a plot sense. And I keep saying in a plot sense, I don't think the twist makes sense because I understand it thematically. Because one of the main themes of the film, and I'll get into the themes more in a minute, is the sort of philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche, which is very it, it's been quite controversial throughout history. It started in the 19th century. It influenced a lot of like fascist leaders in the early 20th century. Your Hitlers and your Mussolinis, um, because it is very much about survival of the fittest. It's inspired by Charles Darwin. Survival of the fittest. Only the strong survive. Um, and Brad Pitt drops a lot of sound bites throughout the film, which are quotes almost lifted from the pages of Nietzsche. Um, and one of Nietzsche's key ideas, I won't go into it too much. I mean, I'm not a philosophy guy really. I couldn't do justice in explaining it. But one of his main ideas is this idea of the Übermensch, or the Superman, if you will, which um, I can't I don't even really know how to explain it. But it's the idea of this, the individual as a more enlightened being. The person that we strive to be, the strong, intelligent person that we all have inside of ourselves that we want to be. That is one of his key ideas. And Brad Pitt is Edward Norton's Übermensch, essentially. So I understand thematically the plot twist. I don't think it makes sense entirely in the plot. So that's one issue I had with the film. The other issue I had a little bit was with the tone. Now, David Fincher's films are known for being unrelentingly dark, at least most of them anyway. I've already reviewed a David Fincher film. I reviewed Alien 3 and I praised it because it had a very consistently dark tone. With this film, from what I understand from reading up on it, his original tone for the film was very dark, but 20th Century Fox were a bit uncomfortable with it. I mean, this came out in 1999. They were uncomfortable with the idea that their film might, in some way, promote or incite or glorify terrorism, basically. So they didn't want it to be seen as too seditious, I think the word is that they used. So they wanted it to have a more sort of tongue in cheek tone, and in some ways I like it. I mean, the comedy is very very dark. Which is something that I do latch on to. And I think the first 10 minutes or so of the film, where Edward Norton's going between he's going to like the different recovery groups, for people that are like alcoholics, people that have cancer or whatever it is, and he's just sort of leeching off their emotion, and that's it's funny in a very sick way, which I thought was quite I thought was interesting. And then when they start the Fight Club and you see all the members of the Fight Club during the day where they've got like horrible bruises and they're like disfigured, and one guy's wearing like a head brace or something, and it's played for comedy. It's like, look at these idiots that are getting involved in these fights, even though it's like completely ruining their appearance and their lives. So I think the dark comedy works. However, I would have I like the idea of this film being more dark. I think I would have taken it a bit more seriously if it had been more sort of consistently serious and dark tone. Now that's not to say that films can't have different themes, and I understand. And I mean, I've just said that the comedy aspects of it I think do work, but every time I watch it, I can't help but think, what would the original version have looked like? Would it have been more emphatic? Would it have been more of a powerful statement? And this leads into this actually is a nice segue into the other issue that I have with the film, and that is, well, something that I like and I don't like. Okay, the themes of the film. So this is a film that overflows with themes, and in my view, it tries to fit too much in. I think having watched this film a few times, it does there is a lot going on in terms of themes. You've got the main theme is crisis of masculinity. It's a critique of capitalism as well. I mentioned the stuff about Nietzsche. It's also what you would probably describe as an existentialist film, which is a film where people in the film contemplate their own existence. They contemplate the meaning of life. And films like that are great. Those are the kind of films that I really, really like if they're done well. The '90s was filled with films like that. There's so many films in the '90s that were existentialist films. Things like well, it's a broad label, but generally there's certain films you would even if something like Eyes Wide Shut is an existentialist film, or David Cronenberg's Crash, or even Trainspotting as well. Was an existentialist film. Actually, that was a film that I think inspired Fight Club a little bit. I thought that the most recent time I watched it, just in the visual style. A lot of existentialist films. So you've all of these different themes packed into Fight Club. I think there's too many. I think it really needed to be more focused. Um, but it's interesting because reading some different people's analysis of Fight Club and the themes, people take wildly different interpretations of this film. I mean, there was an article, I think it was The Guardian, who were saying that basically the whole film's it's like a farce. Essentially, it's a parody of the people that of proponents of the crisis of masculinity, um, which it's a philosophical idea that's been around for 20-25 years, political idea as well. So you've got people that say it's like a parody, it's treating it as absurd, and then you've got other reviews that I read that said it was actually shining a spotlight on those kind of issues. Um, in the film, Brad Pitt talks about how Generation X, if you will, the people between baby boomers and millennials are like the forgotten generation. They have no Great War, they have no Great Depression. Everything's comfortable for them, but they lack stimulation and they lack meaning. And he sort of tries to find it through these fight clubs that he sets up. It gives men an outlet for what he puts forward as being their natural violent state, which is interesting. And I do when I was reading up in the film and its themes, actually, it made me think quite a lot, which isn't something you can say about a lot of films. And I thought to myself, I didn't like this film the first time I saw it, but a film that just evokes these kind of ideas and these kind of themes cannot be bad. Um, and it's true. I mean, you've got so much going on here, so more than could fill a 20-minute video. Um, but I also had the slight sort of niggling feeling. I'm thinking of these themes. I'm trying to sort of reconcile them all in my head. But is that the film that has made me think of these things, or is it reading all of these sort of analysis and critiques of the film? And the answer I think is more the latter. Because when I watched the film, Brad Pitt spells a lot of it out. He goes on these monologues where he's talking about the philosophy of the film, which are interesting. But it wasn't until after the film had finished that I actually started thinking about these things. And I think that part of that is because the film doesn't really. It's a very fast-paced film. It doesn't really let you take in the themes. And for me, that was a problem. And I think that's why the film doesn't completely connect with me yet. Having said that, the themes are good. Existentialist films like this are hard to come by. They're hard to come by when they're done well, and this is one of the most mainstream films like that. I would say. I wish that it had been done serious, and I wish that they had tried to streamline things a little bit, because it's a very confusing film that way, and I think that's one of the reasons I didn't like it the first time I saw it. Um, but on to the things that I did like. I mean, of course, I'm talking about the themes. The themes are thought provoking. Okay, I'm certainly not criticizing the themes. I mean, it's something that I would like to see more of in films. Um, in terms of the the direction and the acting, I mean that stuff's all great. Okay, I mean the technic on a technical level and the film's perfect. I really can't critique it very much. You know, the way it's directed, the fight scenes are so visceral. They're so like in your face, and I think it's David Fincher really knows how to make scenes like that feel real. You know, it's not synthetic. It really does feel like people are getting the shit kicked out of them. Um, and he really is. He really is such a good director. And then there's a lot of clever cinematography in the film as well. You know, when you see Edward Norton at the start, he's in his office environment, buying, rubbish off of catalogs. Everything's very cold and clinical. Everything's very muted. It's not, it's not very vibrant. But then when Brad Pitt appears, suddenly things are vibrant. Um, it's a lot more colourful. Even the way it's shot, it's a lot more sort of exciting and edgy, and the camera's following them as they go around, as opposed to just being static. And I thought it was interesting watching the special features. They reflected the cinematography a little bit um, in Brad Pitt and Edward Norton's appearance. So as the film goes on, Edward Norton, the actor, was like starving himself. Basically, he becomes quite emaciated. He's very sort of pale and dishevelled and sickly looking. Whereas Brad Pitt, they made him go to like tanning salons and had him working out and stuff. And it's just you get that visual contrast between the two, which I thought was quite clever. The acting's great in the film. I think Edward Norton in particular is a really good intense actor. He really shines with these like psychological roles. He was great. He was great in this. He's great in Primal Fear, which is curiously enough is also a film where he plays someone that has a split personality, which I didn't even realize until thinking of it there. American History X, Red Dragon, great at these psychological roles. Brad Pitt's fine in the film. He tends to be hit or miss for me as an actor. It's interesting. David Fincher's previous film to this, Seven, which is the film where you've got a serial killer that's killing people according to the seven deadly sins. I mean that is, to my mind, that is David Fincher's masterpiece. I think it's a near perfect movie. I really can't fault it very much. But the one thing in that film that brings it down slightly for me is Brad Pitt's performance. I think he's terrible in that film. He really is. I don't know what I don't know what they were thinking with that, but he's fine in Fight Club, which I thought was interesting. That him and David Fincher must obviously have a good professional relationship. Of course, Helena Bonham Carter. This was the film that sort of made her. I think she'd done things before this, but this sort of put her into the limelight, and I think that's good. She's always a delight to watch on screen. She brings up any material that she's in, even if the material's not very good. Um, and then Meatloaf, the singer, plays a character in the film, which I always like that. It always warms my heart slightly when you watch a film and there's like a famous musician cast in one of the roles. Not a major role, just like a minor role, but more than a cameo. So for instance, like yeah, the Prestige, when you get David Bowie showing up, or Kingsman, when you've got Elton John. I don't know. I just like that. I think that's a nice little add on to the film. Um, so the direction's fine, the acting's fine. The themes are really interesting. Uh, but overall, I guess I should just bring it together. I can summarize the problems I have with the film, I think, in three sort of bullet points. For me, the plot is messy. The plot twist, in my view, doesn't work in terms of the plot, although it does thematically. And for me, there's themes in the film which are great, but it's too much. It's too overstuffed. They needed to streamline it a little bit. But having said that, this is not a bad film at all. I really tried with this film. I didn't want just to give up and say, "Oh, it's rubbish." Because I think with a film like this, it really does demand um, more analysis and sort of investigation almost, just to look into and see what's going on. Any film that can inspire debate and thought like this, even if it's from the literature about it, has to be good. And my rating for this film did change quite considerably. I mean, when I'm planning out reviews to do, I have a list on my phone and I put like a provisional rating beside the film. And my original provisional rating for this a couple of weeks ago was, just from previous memories of the film, was 58 out of 100. But that is way too unfair. I mean, a film in the 50s for me is like something that's just passable, just just enough to be more good than bad. So the rating, as I read more into it and thought more about it, increased gradually, and I think the overall rating that I would give this film is 73 out of 100. It's very thought provoking. The themes are all interesting, even though there's too many of them, and it's well acted. It's well directed. You know, David Fincher is a fantastic director. He's one of those ones. You know, he's like a Quentin Tarantino or a Christopher Nolan. Whenever there's a film that comes out that's directed by him, I will go and see it, because even his lesser films, they all have a consistent quality and a consistent tone to them. He's someone that obviously loves movies, and it shines through in everything that he's done. So Fight Club is, I would say, definitely worth checking out, because I think lots of people are going to have lots of different opinions on this, and whether you think it's good, whether you think it's bad, it's a film that um, incites conversation, and I think that's something that all great films do.